Welcome back to the Haunted Beard, everybody. My name is Jake. Thank you for joining me. So just a couple weeks ago, I kicked off a new series of videos on my channel talking about Tales from the Crypt. There it is. And I decided to go through the show season by season and rank the episodes of that season. And so today, I'm continuing things with season number 2. This was the show's longest season, biggest season, at least in terms of episodes. And so I've got 18 episodes to rank for you today. I am keeping this spoiler free. So without further ado, here we go. So coming in at last place, number 18, and this is the only episode in season 2 that I would say I didn't really like. But that is Four-Sided Triangle. This is episode 9. This one stars Chelsea Ross, who plays Farmer George, and a young Patricia Arquette, who plays Mary Jo. And Arquette's character is this young woman who is a runaway, and she has now become a farmhand on this farm, and she does chores for them. And Farmer Joe is this older middle-aged man who is very much attracted to Arquette's character, only it turns out that Arquette falls in love with a scarecrow. And the main reason I didn't really care for this one is because it's just kind of gross. You've got this older character who has, the hots for this, young, attractive woman. And it's just kind of this old pervy guy who's acting gross. And a couple of times, he kind of tries to force himself on her. And it's just gross. It's just an old man who's perving out on a younger woman. And that's kind of really all there is to it. He sees her sneaking out late at night, and so he'll get up out of the bed to go follow her around and see what she's doing. And he has a wife who's just this awful, ornery old woman who yells at him and belittles him and stuff like that. And she starts realizing that he's got the hots for this, young woman. And that's really the main tone of the entire episode. Arquette, it takes a blow to the head during an attack by Farmer Joe, and she falls right in front of the scarecrow, and she looks up at it, and it starts moving, and so she thinks it's come alive, and she falls in love with it. And the ending is very predictable. I guess there is a little bit of it that is satisfying, but I just didn't particularly care for this one. There's not really any good horror here, and there's not really any good dark humor here either. And so yeah, I just didn't really jive with this one. I didn't really care for it. Next up at number 17, and I will say we're moving up a tier here. The next chunk of episodes are at least decent and somewhat enjoyable. But coming in at number 17 is episode 11, Judy, You're Not Yourself Today. And this one tells the story of this married couple, and the housewife is very kind of irritated and fed up with her husband and his reckless behavior. He's like this guy who is this extreme gun nut. He's like an NRA fanboy, just very much over the top. And one day she is visited by this elderly cosmetic saleswoman. And this saleswoman obviously has very sinister, devious kind of ulterior motives. And I won't give away what exactly happens, but the main reason why this one is, almost at the very back of the list is I didn't really jive with the tone in this one. This one is very lighthearted. There's hardly any horror here. There is a little bit of kind of a fantastical supernatural element, but the tone here is very silly and goofy and kind of dumb. And it just goes way too far into the humor with having hardly really any horror mixed in there whatsoever. And so, yeah, I just didn't really jive with the tone in this one. Like I said, it's kind of just a farce. It's just very corny and silly. There wasn't much here that stood out to me or was really very memorable. And then also regarding the ending, something happens that didn't really make sense to me, and I didn't really understand why this particular thing happened. It didn't really make sense. And so, yeah, this was another one I just didn't jive with all that much, but it's at least a step above the previous entry. Coming in at number 16 is episode 4, and that is Till Death. And this one tells the story of this gold-digging landowner who owns this Caribbean villa, and he tries to woo this rich young woman. And he does this by getting his ex-lover, who happens to be a witch or involved in some sort of voodoo. She gets involved and mixes up this love potion to try to get this woman to fall in love with this guy because he wants her kind of status and money and things like that. And I don't really have a whole lot to say about this one. It's pretty forgettable, kind of just unmemorable for me for the most part. It kind of plays out in a very typical way, right? He gives her this love potion, but of course he doesn't, give her the right dosage. And so there are consequences for that. And so the last 10 minutes make it at least a decent episode. You get some nice kind of practical and makeup effects. It does get a little silly and ridiculous, but combined with kind of the practical effects and everything, it's decent. It makes it at least worthwhile. Next up at number 15 is episode 12, Fitting Punishment. And this one tells a story of this older funeral director who ends up having to take in his younger nephew because the nephew's parents just died. And this funeral director is just an evil, greedy old man. He is abusive and selfish and just all around a pretty horrible human being. Think of like if Ebenezer Scrooge ran a funeral home, it would be this guy. He takes in his nephew and, tries to teach him some things, and every little tiny mistake the young kid makes, he just gets beat for it and degraded and put down. And overall, the episode it's pretty one note. It's another one that's just, it's okay. This one doesn't have really any sort of humor whatsoever. It's a very kind of serious, darker tone, almost like borderline sad, because you start to feel pretty bad for this kid because of the abuse that he's taken. This guy's just awful and treats him horribly. But you're kind of waiting for his comeuppance or for some revenge or, for something to happen that will give you a bit of a satisfying ending. And you get that a little bit. The ending's okay. It's not the most satisfying thing, but it's all right. And so, yeah, this is another one. It's kind of forgettable. It's pretty one note. There's not a whole lot here that stands out or is super memorable, but it's a decent episode. Coming in at number 14 is episode 6, The Thing from the Grave. This one stars Miguel Ferrer and Terry Hatcher. Ferrer plays an abusive agent who learns that his model of a girlfriend, played by Hatcher, is cheating on him with her photographer. And this episode involves a very intense love triangle. There's actually like a few episodes that were kind of somewhat of a love triangle type story. It seemed to be kind of a recurring theme throughout season 2 of the show. But anyways, this one does something a little bit different in that it starts at the end, shows you something pretty significant that happens, and then, rewinds and flashes back to, the beginning of the story, and then, gets you all caught up, which I'm not typically a fan of movies or shows doing that because to me, it kind of ruins the surprise and the suspense and the mystery of it all. And this is kind of another one of those instances. It's like, why did you just show me what happens at the end? Why don't you just start at the beginning and then go forward from there? This is another one where most of it plays out in a decent enough way. The performances here are pretty good. Hatcher's pretty good. Ferrer's pretty good. He definitely plays that jerk boyfriend role, pretty well. Most of the episode is decent. And then you get to kind of the climax, and there's some decent kind of, dark humor, horror fun to be had. It's nothing great. And really a lot of these, depending on how much I like them, is how well they're able to combine kind of the dark humor and the horror. And this one, the final few minutes are kind of silly, kind of fun. You get some decent kind of creature type effects. But overall, it's another just kind of middle of the road, okay episode. Coming in at number 13 is episode 1, and that is Dead Right. This one stars Demi Moore and Jeffrey Tambor. Demi Moore plays Kathy, a woman who wants a rich and successful life. She visits a medium who tells her that she will meet a man who will inherit a lot of money and die in a violent way soon after. She ends up meeting this grossly overweight man named Charlie, played by Jeffrey Tambor, and she learns that he has these very rich relatives, and so she decides to go ahead and marry him, only things do not pan out the way that she hoped. And overall, this is another kind of middle of the road, decent sort of episode. The performances here are pretty good. You get some pretty high caliber acting here with Demi Moore and Tambor. This one really kind of leans heavily into the dark comedy, as there's a scene at a little like cafe restaurant where Demi Moore is talking to one of her girlfriends, and she's trying to guess and predict how this guy is gonna die, and just like some of those brutal, savage insults, and just like some of the most brutal, savage insults are thrown at this guy because he's, overweight and just this total slob. My main issue, though, with this one is that there is something that happens towards it in the latter half of this episode that is one of the most kind of forced, contrived, out of left field sort of plot developments that it kind of just really lost credibility. Something happens that's just so rare and unlikely, but it has to happen in order to kind of progress the plot forward, but it kind of lost me a little bit. But you kind of see where this one is headed, and again, to get there, they have to throw something in that just feels extremely forced. And so it's another one that's kind of middle of the road for me. Coming in at number 12 is episode 14, Lower Birth. And this one tells the story of Enoch, a two-faced man who is an attraction at a sideshow who falls in love with a 4,000-year-old mummy. And this one is just kind of weird in that I didn't really know kind of what to make of it once it reached the end of the episode. I didn't really know, like, what was it trying to say? What was it trying to do? What was the point of all this? It kind of just threw me off a little bit. You get this carnival setting in this one, and the carnival owner, he runs the show called Feely's Fantastic Fairway of Freaks. And there's all these kind of sideshow acts of these, weird sort of people. And one of them happens to be this guy, kind of a younger guy named Enoch, and he has two faces. And this one kind of has a bit more of a sad tone to it because he's treated in like crap and abused, and he's kept in this cage and stuff. And so everybody's just really mean to him. And then they bring in this new attraction, which is this 4,000-year-old mummy, and he starts developing feelings and develops an attraction to it. And so most of the episode, I was kind of just like, all right, it's just kind of a little weird. It's kind of sad. Where's this story going? And then you find out at the very end, and I don't think this is technically a spoiler. This is revealed in the IMDb plot synopsis, but if you don't want to know what I'm about to say, just skip ahead like 10 seconds. But it turns out that Enoch and this mummy, he takes her away with him, and they escape, and the mummy conceives a child. And it turns out that that child is the Crypt Keeper. And so this is the origin story of the Crypt Keeper. This one was just kind of a weird one. I didn't really know what to think about it. It was okay. The ending at least kind of makes it a little interesting, but overall it was just kind of like, all right, I guess. I don't know what this is supposed to be. It just kind of threw me off. I don't know. This was just a weird one for me. Coming in at number 11 is the final episode, number 18, and that is The Secret. And this one tells the story of a young orphan boy by the name of Theodore, who is adopted by the odd and well-off Colberts, who possess a dark secret. But it turns out they are not the only ones. And this episode is really kind of built all around that secret. And so there is an element of mystery here, which I appreciate. This was another episode that was pretty good, but nothing great. And so, like I said, it's largely involving around this secret. And the first secret has to do with this boy's parents. It starts off, he's at this orphanage and then gets adopted by this very rich couple. The wife is played by Grace Zabriskie. She does a pretty good job in this sort of role, just kind of a very odd, sort of eerie, feeling like a little bit of a sinister type of presence, but she does a pretty good job with her performance. And the young boy Theodore ends up befriending the butler at this house. His name is Tobias. I liked kind of a little bit of the friendship and relationship that developed between them. And this episode kind of gives you little subtle clues throughout that kind of lead you to what the secret might be. You're trying to figure out what the secret is with his parents, and then also why this couple are acting so weird. They're always gone. He hardly ever sees them, and they're always feeding him desserts and sweets. Like for every meal, he's like eating cake and pie and things like that. And so you're kind of just trying to figure out what's going on. And there is really two reveals or two kind of answers to those two main questions, what you get in the end. I was able to predict one of them, and the other one, I kind of had a maybe towards it. And so I mostly knew where it was going. But like I said, this one was pretty good. Again, I liked the relationship between the boy and the butler. This one had some pretty good atmosphere, and I did appreciate the mystery that was involved as well. Coming in at number 10 is episode 2, The Switch. And this one was directed by Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people. And this one tells the story of this rich old man who falls in love with this young, beautiful woman, only she declines his advances, obviously because of their age difference, but he is willing to do whatever it takes to make her happy and to get her to fall in love with him. And this one was pretty good. I liked some of the themes here, like, the lengths we're able to go to find true love and things like that. This one has a cool kind of mad scientist doctor type of character and setting. Definitely get some Frankenstein type vibes to this one, which is cool. This one felt the most kind of Twilight Zone-ish as well, which is always a good thing. And so you get just kind of some cool vibes. It's sort of a gnarly little story that has a pretty, I think, kind of poignant message. And so, yeah, it's pretty good. I think Arnold does a pretty good job. I don't know if he's really directed anything else, but he showed some talent here. And there's kind of a nice little darkly humorous twist at the end that I thought was pretty good. Coming in at number 9 is episode 5, and that is Three's a Crowd. And this one tells the story of this married couple who are trying to enjoy their anniversary, but the husband becomes convinced that his wife is cheating on him. And we're moving up another tier here. This next handful, I would say, are some pretty good episodes that I largely enjoyed. And this is a pretty good one. This one is nearly a one-location episode, and you've just got a very small cast of characters. There's technically 4 characters, but there's really only mainly 3. And they are the married couple and then their rich friend, who is the one who's actually bought them their anniversary present, this vacation, only he decides to tag along with them. And the couple here are kind of, falling on tough times, and they're having relationship issues and things like that. And like I said, the guy becomes convinced that his wife is cheating on him with his friend, and he just becomes more and more jealous and more paranoid. And the highlight here in this episode, I think the performances are really strong, but mainly the main performance by Gavin O'Herlihy. I think he's really good, and I just enjoyed kind of watching him slowly descend into that pit of unhinged jealousy. And so I like the performance here. I also like that this is an episode where you're kind of questioning what we're seeing, because we see everything through this guy's eyes and through his perspective. And not only is he insanely jealous, but he's also an alcoholic. And so we're kind of questioning how much can we trust what he's seeing and what we're seeing. And so I like that there's a little bit of that unreliable narrator aspect to it. It kind of, just builds some mystery and some suspense and some intrigue. And then the ending is pretty solid and memorable. And I thought it was just good. And so, yeah, this is a pretty good episode overall. And it comes in at number 9. Next up at number 8 is episode 17, My Brother's Keeper. And this one tells the story of twin brothers, Eddie and Frank, who also happen to be Siamese twins who are connected at the butt. One of them is timid and kind-hearted, and the other is reckless and sadistic. And they must make a decision on whether or not to allow an experimental surgery to have them separated. And this episode does a pretty good job mixing some of the horror with some of the dark humor. And it leans a little bit more into the humor, but there's enough horror there that I enjoyed the balance and the mixture between both of those tones. This one is just kind of funny because you have these two people, two brothers who obviously literally joined at the hip. And they could not be more different. And so they get into some very awkward and weird situations. It opens up with a scene where they're at the bar and one of them's trying to have this pleasant conversation with this woman, but then his brother is just an obnoxious loudmouth. And then he tries to start dating this woman, only his brother's there. And so I mean, you can just kind of imagine it's sort of, hijinks ensue and there's just weird, crazy situations. And so there is some pretty good humor there. And there's also some kind of cool little bit of body horror type stuff going on here as well. I just liked how this one played out. I liked their clash of personalities and just kind of the conflict and sort of the craziness that, was produced because of that. It's an interesting just kind of setup in concept, and so I liked it for that. I thought the performances were pretty good. It is humorous. There's a scene where they literally start punching one another and get into this huge fight that I thought was just pretty great. And then I really liked how this one ended too. It just has a nice kind of, twist of fate, kind of darkly humorous, horrific sort of twist. It just worked. Yeah, I quite enjoyed this one. I thought it was pretty good. Coming in at number 7 is episode 7, and that is The Sacrifice. And this one tells the story of a hotshot insurance salesman who ends up murdering this business tycoon in order to steal his wife and his fortune, but later he becomes blackmailed by a rival. And I liked this one because it gave me some film noir vibes. This is kind of a classic noir type crime sort of setup. This is an episode that, like, to me, they should have filmed this in black and white. I think that would have just kind of been the cherry on top. Although they do have a flashback sequence that is filmed in black and white, and so I at least appreciated that. Again, it kind of contributed more to those noir type vibes. I like kind of this, high-rise downtown penthouse type of location and setting. You got sort of this potential femme fatale. You got, blackmail, murder, money, stuff like that involved. It's just a good setup that I really enjoy. Michael Ironside shows up in the latter half of the episode. I really like his performance, and his character here just gives off some really nice kind of sinister type vibes. And so I thought he just fit the character really well. I liked him. One of the highlights of the episode. And this one's just kind of again, it's just a good kind of crime thriller type story. There's a lot of story, kind of a lot of twists and turns that are sort of packed in this, 25, 30-minute runtime. And I just had a good time with this one overall. I quite enjoyed it. Coming in at number 6 is episode 13, Corman's Calamity. And this one is about this comic book illustrator who works for Tales from the Crypt comic books. And it turns out that he has somehow acquired this ability to make the monsters that he draws and designs in the comic book actually come to life. And I liked this one. I like kind of the meta aspect of it, the sort of self-aware aspect. And that was just kind of a fun, sort of unique take in an episode. We haven't really seen that sort of approach yet. So I like that about it. This one feels very comic booky, if that makes sense. Everything's kind of, over the top, exaggerated, kind of theatrical. The main character, his wife, is just this awful, brutal woman who insults him, but she's kind of just goofy and corny. And the whole episode kind of has that sort of silly, corny tone to it. But typically, that's been my complaint with a lot of the previous episodes, that sort of tone. But it really kind of works here, and I liked that approach. I thought that tone kind of fit well within this sort of world and that whole kind of meta aspect. My only real issue with this one is there's a romance that develops between the comic book guy and this police officer, and it just feels very rushed and forced, and there's not a whole lot of chemistry between these two. And I feel like that can happen fairly often when you've got, short 30-minute long TV episodes and you bring some kind of romance into it. It can feel very rushed, and it kind of does in this episode. But it didn't really hinder it a whole lot, as the rest of it I really enjoyed. This one has some, again, good humor to it, and it's got some cool designs and monster creations. And so I really like that aspect as well. You get kind of some cool creature effects and a little bit of, blood and gore, stuff like that. And so, yeah, this is a pretty good one. I overall had a pretty good time with it. Next up at number 5, and these last 5 episodes, we're moving up yet another tier. These top 5 I really enjoyed, and I thought they were all pretty great. But coming in at number 5 is episode 3, Cutting Cards. And this episode stars Lance Henriksen and Kevin Feige, I think is how you pronounce his name. But these guys play the characters of Reno and Sam, and they are these hardcore gamblers who sit down to play a game of cards, and the outcome and consequences of this game are pretty wild. And man, I really enjoyed this episode. The performances by both of those two leads are really solid, and just their rivalry and their clash as these guys play for blood. It was thrilling and intense, and I just really, really enjoyed it. Their performances here are really solid. The characters, the writing, and the dialogue, I thought was all just really top-notch stuff. You get a little bit of kind of a Western type kind of showdown, but at the poker table kind of thing. And so I really like that aspect and that approach. This one too has some nice lighting, kind of some neon shadowy colors and stuff like that. That really kind of helps sell the overall vibe of this thing. And the treat here is just watching both of these actors go back and forth to see who's going to kind of finally come out with the upper hand and who's going to win, as they both hate each other. And so there's just this tension from who their characters are and that clash. And it was a whole lot of fun to watch them two go at it and see kind of how it all plays out. And the ending here is pretty great. It's a really great mixture of being kind of wickedly twisted and humorous at the same time. And yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. It's pretty solid. Coming in at number 4 is episode 15, Mute Witness to a Murder. And this one stars Patricia Clarkson. She plays the character by the name of Susie. And this episode opens up, Susie is out on the balcony of her house and she witnesses a murder in a house right across from hers. And she sees this man kill a woman right through the window of the house. And she is so traumatized and terrorized by what she saw, she is rendered mute and so is unable to tell anybody what she just witnessed. And I really love the setup with this one. It starts off right away giving you those kind of Rear Window vibes, which is never a bad thing. However, the story really progresses much further beyond that, but that is such a great hook that really kept me invested. And this one has a pretty significant kind of reveal that happens only a few minutes into the episode. And I don't want to give that away because it was a genuine kind of shock and surprise for me. And this episode really just ratchets up some great tension. There's not really any humor in this one, and so it really kind of goes straight for the horror and the thrills. So I really appreciated that. I really liked the setting in this one too, as not too long into the episode, Susie gets taken to this like mental institution and is put into a padded room. And so you get kind of that sort of, psychological insane asylum type of vibe to it. But the highlight here for me is the performance by Richard Thomas, who plays a guy by the name of Dr. Trask. And man, I thought he crushed this performance. His character, his presence is cold-blooded, sinister, evil, and man, I thought he was really great. He's probably my favorite performance from anybody in all of season 2. But yeah, had a really good time with this one. My only kind of minor issue with this one is the ending is pretty good, but it's not quite as satisfying as I wanted. But the rest of the episode is really, really good, and that's why it's at my number 4. Coming in at number 3 is episode 8, For Crying Out Loud. And this one stars Lee Ehrenberg, who plays a guy by the name of Marty Slash, and he is this rock promoter who is trying to steal a bunch of money during this rock concert, this like sort of for charity benefit rock concert. Only his conscience, which is a voice inside of his head, gets in the way and causes all sorts of craziness. And this episode really hooked me in right from the opening scene, as you have Lee Ehrenberg in a prison cell freaking out, screaming, going crazy, and begging for the electric chair. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? And then we jump back to 2 years earlier, and as I just kind of criticized one of my previous entries for starting at the end and then rewinding back, and I'm typically not a fan of that, this one has that same type of approach, but it really, really works. And so we jump back 2 years earlier, and there's Marty at the doctor's office, and he's complaining that he has voices, and he hears voices inside of his head, and he's trying to figure out what in the world's going on. Well, it turns out the voice in his head is his own conscience, and his conscience is voiced by none other than Sam Kinison. And let me tell you, this is some of the most perfect casting. Kinison in this role crushes it, and he's just kind of his typical comedic persona, his loud, obnoxious, just screaming sort of self. And it's funny, it's great, it's loud, it's crazy. He's sitting there screaming at Lee Ehrenberg and just busting on him and tearing into him. And this is probably the funniest episode of the entire season. And this is one where the humor just really works because it's so kind of wild and crazy and extreme and over the top. And Ehrenberg's performance is fantastic. There's a couple scenes where he is like literally losing his mind and freaking out. And at the same time he's freaking out, you got Sam Kinison screaming at him and yelling at him. And it's all just a whole lot of fun. And so I really like this one. This one largely takes place too at this rock concert, and you've got Iggy Pop in the background singing songs. And so you get kind of this, 80s sort of rock and roll vibe to it as well. But yeah, all around, I just had a really good time with this one, and kind of watching Ehrenberg trying to navigate this situation as he's trying to get out of this place with all this money that he just stole. Turns out Katie Sagal is in this episode as well, and she shows up and she starts blackmailing him. And so you got just this wild, insane, crazy situation that unfolds that is really funny and over the top, and I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. It's pretty great. Coming in at number 2 is episode 16, Television Terror. This one stars Morton Downey Jr., and he plays this like TV shock journalist, this guy who hosts kind of this like late night true crime type of show. It's called Horton Rivers Live, and he goes in to investigate this eerie haunted house. And man, this one is a whole lot of fun. The performance by Downey Jr. here is really good, and I don't know a whole lot about the actor, but from what I do know about him, it sounds like this type of character is pretty close with his real-life type of persona. He's kind of this obnoxious loudmouth who doesn't really care about anybody except his job, and it's kind of like, do anything, whatever it takes to get the shot sort of thing. And he'll, at the expense of anyone else and everyone else that he works with. And so you're kind of hoping and waiting for this guy to kind of get his comeuppance and get what he deserves. But what I really liked about this one is that it is technically not, but is a little bit of a found footage type of presentation. And so I really like that about it, as this really all takes place in real time as we watch him take this cameraman into this house, and he's communicating with his crew who are outside in the van. And so you've got this real-time presentation to it. It reminded me a little bit of Late Night with the Devil. And so there's just kind of some similarities there. And like I said, while it's technically not found footage, there are some shots where you see the live camera feed from inside the house. And so you do get a little bit of that in there. And I just really like this one. I like the type of presentation. I like kind of the true crime type story to it. And I really like the whole haunted house vibe. This is another one that has a really good mixture of horror and humor, as the longer him and his cameraman are in this house, the creepier and more kind of, haunted things become. And so you get some genuine kind of, spooky sort of haunted house vibes, while also them are just completely freaking out. And there's a couple shots where you see the look on the cameraman's face and the guy is just like, about to crap his pants. And so, yeah, it's funny, but it's also spooky and kind of creepy at the same time. This episode had maybe my favorite line out of any episodes from this entire season, where basically all hell's breaking loose in this haunted house, and he's inside there screaming and begging to get out. And the woman who's like his assistant is talking to him over the headset in the van, and she's like, "We got to keep you in there. The ratings are too high." And it's just great. I mean, it says everything that needs to be said about this type of episode and kind of what it's going for. But yeah, really great stuff. And you get some nice haunted house stuff and kind of some scary moments towards the end of the episode. The ending is also pretty great, and it's kind of everything you would want. And again, it kind of lends to that found footage type of presentation where things kind of start off a little bit slower, and then they, progress and gradually get more crazy until the ending's just kind of all out chaos. And so, yeah, this one's pretty great. Had a really good time with Television Terror. And finally, coming in at number 1, my favorite episode of season 2 is episode 10, The Ventriloquist's Dummy. And this one stars the great Don Rickles and also Bobcat Goldthwait. And Goldthwait plays Billy Goldman, who is this young amateur ventriloquist, and he tracks down his idol, played by Don Rickles, who is this old and retired ventriloquist, and he wants to learn from him and learn how to be better, only he finds out that being a ventriloquist might not be the best career path for him. And I don't want to get too much into this one. It's going to be hard to talk about without giving too much away, but man, I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This one is, again, it's such a great mixture of horror and humor, and it works together really great. The first half of this episode kind of plays out in a more sort of serious, dramatic tone, as once Goldman tracks down Mr. Ingalls and he finds Rickles, he finds out that, he had to retire many years ago, and he got injured in this fire, and he lost his girlfriend, and so he was kind of forced to retire, and he's kind of lived as a recluse for many, many years. And he wants Mr. Ingalls to attend his first live ventriloquist performance, and so he gets up on stage and starts doing his performance. And it's just a complete and total disaster. And from then point on, something is revealed about why Mr. Ingalls had to retire that takes this thing in a completely wild and unexpected direction. And man, I so much enjoyed the last half of this episode. It is fantastic. There are some great sequences that are hilarious, and you get some really great, I'll just say, creature and practical type effects. And I don't want to get into any more specifics than that, but the last 10 minutes of this are fantastic and darkly humorous, great stuff, really funny. And I really like the performances too from Rickles and Goldthwait and their characters. And this one just kind of takes this weird sort of idea about these, ventriloquists, and you're like, okay, what are you possibly going to do with that? And then injects just some craziness into it. And so there's a kind of this reveal that happens that's genuinely kind of shocking and surprising, while also kind of just downright hilarious and crazy at the same time, that I was like, what in the world is going on here? It's so unexpected and so great. I had a big old smile on my face. And yeah, I just love the unexpected direction that this thing took and kind of where it got to in the latter half of it and everything that went down. And it's got a great ending. It's got good performances. It's just that really kind of perfect mixture of the horror and sort of the creature type stuff, specifically with this one, while also giving us some really great humor as well. And yeah, the ventriloquist dummy, man, is pretty great stuff. I had a lot of fun with this one, and that is why it is my number one. All right, everybody, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. Hit me up down below, like always. Let me know some of your favorite episodes from Season 2. Would really love to hear from you. Really enjoying the show. This is my first time going through this show, and so these are all first-time watches for me. And so, yeah, having a fun time going through these. There's some pretty good stuff here. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor, and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.